Oh, this is really exciting. Oh, it's going to be a busy day on Monday.
Yeah, just like, oh, we're already behind schedule.
Hello and welcome to the EuroWhat, episode 243, dropping on October 8th, 2024. We are a pair of Americans trying to make sense of the Eurovision Song Contest. I'm Mike McComb, and I'm here with my co-host, Ben Smith. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Mike.
In this episode, we'll be talking about who's who in the Eurovision Reference Group. I thought with this episode, it might be fun to do a fun topic, or at least one that's lighter than what we've been talking about the last few episodes.
We've earned that this year.
Yeah. And one of the things that came up was the Eurovision Reference Group. It's an organization that we talk about. I was going to say that we reference every now and then. And I think there's this underlying assumption. It's like, oh, everybody knows who that is. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Looking at the structure of how the contest actually gets put on, doing a deeper dive on that would be kind of interesting.
We mentioned a lot during the news episodes as though we know the direct makeup of that group and what they're discussing. Neither of which we actually know. We just sort of hear once they get done doing the thing.
Talking about delegations and the reference group and what their relationship is and their relationship to the overall contest, and then going into heavy critiques about how this could end up having impacts on... Never mind. We'll keep it light on the critiques. Thinking about the delegations, and this will just be a smaller part of the discussion, how would you define delegation, or at least your understanding of what the delegation is?
So when I think of a delegation at Eurovision, you have the artist, any sort of supporting performers, so like dancers, backup vocalists, that sort of thing, and then probably some number of people from their television network that understands the Eurovision side of things, of like, this is when rehearsals are, just sort of keeping track of that, generally overseeing and representing that broadcaster as well at the contest, and outside the contest at something like the reference group. So the larger body of everything that's overseeing the overall performance of that nation in the contest.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Delegations can really vary in size. Like, it's going to depend on how many people are in the performing group, what their entourage is like. The people in production, choreographers, costume designers, makeup artists, like everything that goes into producing the entry. And that also includes the home broadcaster. So it can be a very large group. The whole delegation may not necessarily travel to the host city, but it's many, many hands trying to make very light work of what is going to be presented at any given Eurovision. So
exactly.
Each country has their own delegation. And each country has a head of delegations. They're like the project manager, the mom of the group, like making sure that everything is running smoothly, more or less, handling any problems, being the point person. The way that I encountered head of delegation getting translated on Icelandic Wikipedia in researching this episode is tour guide, which I thought was a really cute way of describing it, because I have a feeling the word being translated is more like tour manager, but I am also picturing somebody like walking around carrying a flag for everybody to kind of follow around, like one of those goose parades that go through like Dutch cities. So the head of delegation is the go-to person. All of the heads of delegation meet a couple of times a year, usually in the host city, whenever there's any sort of meeting that needs to happen across all of the participating countries for a given Eurovision. The reference group is not exactly a subset of the heads of delegation. There are heads of delegation on the reference group, but the reference group is more of like a steering committee, executive committee. I previously worked in alumni relations, and there was like the alumni council that was heads of various committees coming together multiple times a year to kind of talk about like bylaws enactment and such. So a lot of Verily happening. It's a much smaller group than the heads of delegation group. Like heads of delegation, that's going to be 35 to 40 countries in a given year. The reference group is just 10 people. And they are tasked with approving the development and future format of the contest, securing financing, modernizing the brand, and raising overall awareness of the contest, and overseeing the yearly preparation by the host broadcaster. The reference group was established back in 1998, so it's been around for about 25 years. They meet 5 to 6 times a year, depending on like what sort of work needs to be done. There is a chairperson who I couldn't find anything in terms of term limits. The previous person in the chairperson role was in that role for 13 years. So it sounds like it's a kind of job. And really, for everybody on the reference group, it seems like it's one of those things where the people who are on it are the people who really want to be on it. It's like a lot of extra responsibility on top of everything else that they're doing, because if they are also a head of delegation, they have all of that. And then they also have their like day-to-day non-Eurovision work that they are probably doing with their broadcaster. So first prize, if you get elected on there, is a 2-year term. Second prize, a 3-year term. That's kind of what it sounds like.
Is like, as somebody who has been on like the board of a nonprofit before, you're there because you want to be there. In my case, it was like 1-year terms. Like, you're continuing to like essentially run because you want to keep doing the work you're doing.
Right. If somebody really wants to be on the board, like I'm sure there are ways to negotiate that happening, particularly with the way that this board is structured. 3 of the members are elected from the heads of delegation. There are also 2 kind of at-large members who are added to the board based on competence and experience and possibly desire to be part of the reference group. There is also the executive producer or representative of the executive producer of the current host country, as well as the 2 previous hosts. That would be Switzerland, Sweden, and UK. So it is the host broadcaster, not necessarily the defending champion of that year. So Ukraine is not currently on the board. That may be a bylaws thing. It may also be that it's not a top priority for Ukraine right now.
That one's a weird case in this sort of who makes this part of the reference group up.
Exactly. And again, since this was established in 98, this would have been the first time that this sort of circumstance popped up. The last person on the board is Martin Oosterdahl. We won't get into Martin on this episode just because I think it would be more interesting to talk about his role as its own episode, probably next season after his 5th Eurovision, because just kind of going through the list of all of the stuff that he has had to work through during his tenure, there's a lot to discuss there. And again, trying to keep this light. So
yeah, keeping it light, waiting for a number that ends with a 5, pew, 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 etc.
Yeah. Martin, get excited for your 5-year review this time next year. I'll start at the top with the chairperson. The current chairperson is Bakel Walden, who is from Switzerland. He was appointed in June of 2023, so he's been on the board for a little over a year now. As I mentioned, his predecessor was in the role for 13 years, so a pretty lengthy tenure there. Bakel's background includes working with Luxembourg's broadcaster in offices all over Europe. So like Germany, Luxembourg, and RTL offices in Greece, working with some of their syndication subsidiaries there. So a lot of experience working with different broadcasters in different broadcasting environments. His background's in media strategy for commercial and public broadcasting. So really kind of approaching this from like a business side of things. What's interesting is he is leaving his role as Director of Development and Offering at SRG SSR, the Swiss broadcaster, at the end of October. This is probably his last year on the board. He'll continue as chair through the 2025 contest, but there is an expectation that there's going to be some handover probably in June of 2025. Next up are the 3 elected members that are coming from the head of delegation group. The first one is Felix Bergson, who comes from Iceland. He has not updated his LinkedIn in forever.
Which, you know what? I feel that same.
Did find his website. His CV only goes up to 2012, but man, he's done a lot. His background is acting, writing, composing. He's been a voice artist for several dubs for Disney movies in Iceland. And he's also a broadcaster working at RÚV, primarily on their radio stations. He's been head of the Icelandic delegation since 2017. He did have to step back from his broadcasting work in 2024 because his husband was running for president of Iceland.
Yes, yeah. I remembered that.
Yep. So, unfortunately, he finished 5th, but he seems like a real character. Jan Bors, who was the former head of delegation for the Czech delegation, during 2020 and 2021, he was doing a video series of interviews with members of different delegations. And Felix was like the first or second one that he did. So we'll have a video of that linked in the show notes. But
oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. Like a really interesting guy. You do also see him pop up at various national selections and stuff whenever they have an international jury. And he's very gung-ho about Eurovision. Very gung-ho about trans rights, very upfront about that. One of the first people in Iceland to really drive home the point that trans rights are human rights. We love that. I think he's a really interesting guy.
When I think about Iceland in the contest, I continue to find their environment for if you are a person who wants to work in the creative arts. You can have the chance to wear a lot of hats in Iceland. You can do broadcasting and a bunch of the behind the scenes stuff and be in 17 different bands.
Oh yeah, he's been in a couple of bands as well. Like he has a lot of links on his Wikipedia page.
Yeah, no, like it's just a really interesting, just because it's a very small community. Like you really get the sense that like everybody gets to try on a lot of different hats and do a lot of different interesting creative work. Mm-hmm. But also just like, in terms of the contest, Iceland really loves the contest. Like they had lower viewership than expected this year, but it was still a lot of viewership.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense that Iceland would have representation on this board because it's like I don't know of a country that is a bigger fan of the contest. Second person from the HOD group is Anna Marie Bordas. She is from Spain, and she is a journalist whose entire career has been with RTVE, which is Spain's broadcaster. She's been the director of international projects at the network from 2017 to 2021, so that overlapped with her first stint as part of the heads of delegation. And her most significant contribution has been getting Spain back into participating in other Eurovision competitions. So like Junior Eurovision, the Young Musicians Contest, and really kind of like all of these like spin-off products. She joined the reference group in 2023. She had to kind of step back from head of delegation a little bit in the early 2020s just because like she had a lot of different responsibilities and not directly involved with developing Benidorm as a selection process. That was something that was deputized. But yes, she's now back in head of delegation role for that. So I think having the Spanish influence in there is interesting, just from like having the Big Five perspective.
That feels like another important perspective to have making up the representation on essentially the board.
Yes. And also having the journalism background.
Yeah.
Since the EBU is primarily about like public media and information sharing. So having that perspective on the contest, I think is adding to the diversity of viewpoints to like how to approach the contest. The third HOD member is Carla Bugalho. She is from Portugal. She also joined in 2023. She was the head of delegation for Portugal in 2017. Things worked out well for them there. And yeah, she was the deputy executive producer for Eurovision 2018. So she's bringing that host nation experience, particularly first time host nation experience. So I think that is an interesting perspective. She's also a producer for Festival de Canção, and she produced a documentary about Conan Osiris, their 2019 Eurovision representative for RTP. So approaching it from like the selection show, like national selection perspective of being a delegate. So the three members that are coming from the head of delegation, they are bringing vastly different experience, which I think is neat.
Yeah, good diversity of viewpoint to approach Eurovision from.
Looking at the executive producers that are part of the reference group, we have the current host nation. So Switzerland has 2 seats on the board at the moment. Moritz Stadler is representing the broadcaster. We talked about the two people who are the executive producers of this upcoming contest. And he is the one who previously worked at the EBU, his background's in operations and live performance broadcasting. So this seemed like a really good fit because this is the group that is going to be interfacing with the EBU much more directly than the rest of the delegations. So already knowing how the EBU is going to function and how that decision-making process is going to work, he's going to be kind of the go-between for this upcoming production year and the reference group. So I think that's going to be a really good match. And I found a really good interview with him from shortly after the host city was announced, which I'll have linked in the show notes. And yeah, seems really approachable and just really acknowledging, wow, there is not a lot of time to plan a contest. It had a really good anecdote about what it was like as all of the 12s were rolling in back in May, and just be like, oh, this is really exciting. Oh, it's going to be a busy day on Monday.
Just like, oh, we're already behind schedule.
Exactly. Yes. Those words exactly.
Having also worked on events like that where it's like, oh, we won. Oh, okay.
Reaping and sowing. Awesome.
Yeah. Just
And that's kind of the viewpoint that's been shared by the other EPs that are part of the reference group. Ebba Adelson is the representative from Sweden. Prior to the contest this year, she was the head of SVT Entertainment. She stepped back from that role so that she could focus on producing Eurovision in Malmo this year. 2024 was her first Eurovision rodeo, even though a lot of the production team behind Eurovision 2024 had worked in 2016 and in 2013. She was one of the new people on the team. So kind of a tough year to start out with that.
I am mentally picturing the animated GIF of Donald Glover entering the house with all of the pizzas.
Mm-hmm. Yes. She keeps a very low profile online, which I can understand. Like if you're head of entertainment at SVT, you probably do not want to be getting random pitches from people.
My Instagram is immediately just getting private. Do not DM me.
I did manage to find one interview, a quick Q&A, because I think this was, this published like the week of Eurovision. It's like, she's busy. But let me send you... I will ask the question. I would love for you to read the response. What was the first feeling when Loreen won Eurovision and Sweden would organize the competition in 2024?
Delight mixed with horror. A delight that Loreen made history as the only Swede and the first woman to win the competition twice. And that Sweden won for the 7th time. The feeling was great fun, but also, how are we going to get it together in a year? I have never worked with Eurovision, but heard that when you take over the baton, the Eurovision director usually says, you are already too late.
I have a feeling that answer would have, regardless of what has happened in the previous year, like that was going to be the answer. Looking up other articles where she's quoted, just very kind of banal answers, like just really kind of thrown into this like inglorious position of being like, oh, now I have to comment on all of this stuff that is happening around me, like just trying to get this show produced. And yeah, like this was a tough year to have it be
your first rodeo.
And then the other previous EP who's on the board is Rachel Ashdown from the UK. She is a commissioning editor for entertainment at BBC, and she's been with the Beeb for over 10 years. As a commissioning editor, she works with independent production companies who are bringing like programming ideas and basically kind of like, if it's not being produced by the BBC, licensing their work to broadcast on the BBC. She is mostly working on new series. One of the shows that she worked on was All Together Now, which is where Michael Rice came from.
Well, I'm just laughing because I remember reading the Wikipedia page about All Together Now and Michael Rice was selected and just going, this seems very complicated.
Yes. But she was head of delegation in 2019. So, it's all coming together. This will be her last year on the board as a previous EP. Looking at the two at-large members that are part of the reference group, Tomislav Stengel is the head of delegation for Croatia. He's an editor and producer and was instrumental in Dora's revamp in 2023. That there were earlier releases of the songs, like previous editions of Dora, the songs would get released a week, maybe 10 days before the show. And this year it was much, much earlier. People were able to like have access to the songs and sit with them a little bit before they were actually performed on stage. One of the big changes, which I was not aware of, is that if you win Dora, your expenses get covered. So yeah, there's like an actual incentive to winning this and moving on to Eurovision. 2024 was his 5th contest, but you can see, like, just thinking of what Croatia's progression has been over the last 5 years. Yeah. He knows what he's doing and is very transparent with the press. Like, there were a lot of interviews, particularly this year, given how well Croatia did at the contest, talking about all of the arrangements that needed to be made, calming people down after the jury and televote results came in, just be like, nope, this is just how the contest works. We still did very, very well.
Like, this is the best we've ever done. We are still elated about this.
Yes. And, just really good at like setting expectations, but has a vision for how to move forward.
I like the cut of his jib.
The other at-large member is Alexandra Wolfslast, who is from Germany. She's been head of delegation there since 2020. Thinking of Germany's progression, and I did not realize this until I saw it in an article. 2019 to 2023, Germany's best placement was 25th. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, wow, okay. Like, did not think about it until you said it. And, so she's also someone that you may have seen pop up. She was on the international jury for Melfest in 2023. Like, Spain is bringing that Big Five presence and Germany's also bringing that Big Five presence. They're also the 2 Big Five countries that are probably in the most trouble. I mean, UK is, on the board as well, but, I think they've, I don't know, more accepting of the fact. It's weird with having them have hosted recently.
Well, and like Spain has in the past couple of years been in both positions of doing very, very well and also coming in last. But Germany has I'm trying to not do the Bane voice, just like I was born in the It's like they're very familiar with last place.
Looking at this overall board and the countries that they're representing, it's not the powerhouses. Like, Sweden's the only real powerhouse that is on the reference group. Like, these are all countries that have been either in recent wilderness periods or... Yeah, like, I mean, Switzerland's been having a good go of things in the most recent years, but as we talked about in the previous episode, it was a rough ride for, like, the last 25 years. UK as well. Spain has been very up and down. Portugal's been in a good spot, but that started in 2017. Like, it's still fairly recent.
Yes.
I like the idea that the reference group has kind of the underdogs that are represented. But I think there's also the concern that's like, there are other underdogs that aren't quite represented, but that may be a limitation of this group where, like, you think of countries like Malta, San Marino, like these much smaller countries that may not have the resources that would allow somebody to be like on the head of delegations group and take on the additional responsibility of the reference group. So in terms of that sort of diversity, I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, I am picturing the meme format of the mother holding the one child in the pool while the other one is very clearly struggling and just mentally applying Malta and or San Marino on the child that is having a little trouble in the water.
Yeah. And also that this is very much Western Europe.
Yeah, it's like I would love some Eastern Europe representation in there.
Yeah. It's like, where would Latvia? Could we get Latvia?
Yeah, what about a Latvia? What about a Lithuania? They're having a great time over there.
Yeah, and I would love to see how changes, like, really, I just want to be a fly on the wall for some of these conversations that are happening, because it's just like Switzerland and Croatia were on the reference group for 2023 and they had a very good 2024. So it's just like, if they're making suggestions, it's like, oh, they're making really good suggestions and they're coming from a place of like, all right, we want to do well at the contest. So it would be great if, like, there are other countries that have had similar struggles getting a chance to get on the reference group. It's like, well, this is what we need. How can we get this to happen? And see if it's like a rising tide lifts all boats, or if it's just like, please just throw votes our way. I don't know.
Just what do we need to do to rig things for Malta?
No, it's not rigging. It's not rigging.
This is the perspective that Malta brings to the board. It's like, what if we won?
Right. Yes. So I was really just kind of tickled by reading up on the reference group because, as we mentioned, we only kind of hear about it like after they have their meetings. It'd be like, these are the rule changes, or nothing came out of this meeting. It was just all bylaws talk.
Or just like, we've elected a new pope.
Yeah, exactly. So like just with the makeup of this group, it's like, oh, this is really an interesting combination, very different backgrounds of each member, and you have an understanding of what sort of concerns they may be bringing to the table and thinking of other countries that have similar concerns that are getting represented here. So I think it's a neat group and a really good assortment.
Yeah. It's like knowing who is in that mix. Like, I'm like, oh, those are the people, like knowing their background, like those are the people I would want there to have those views.
I think they have a busy year ahead of them. I mean, like, obviously they are going to be the ones that are forming those committees that are going to work through like Slovenia's checklist and various other countries' checklists following the 2024 contest. But I'm optimistic, and and of course Martin Oosterdal also on the board. We'll get to him at some other point. So.
You just sit there and think about what you've done, Martin.
Yeah. He's doing what he can. And it'll be interesting to see how this group works with the new employment structure, or just the fact that there's
sort of like the new structure that definitely came out of this year's meeting so far. It's just like, Martin, what if you focus on this and we have a couple other people come in and focus on these aspects of the job?
This would probably be a good thing to check in on, like, every year, because there's going to be people that roll off each year. Like, we know that there's probably going to be a new chairperson next year, and we have no idea who's going to win in 2025. So they're going to have a seat at the table as well. And UK is going to roll off, and like it's a fun new thing to watch. So.
Yeah, exactly. Just like a fun new set of tea leaves to try and read.
I think that's going to do it for this episode of the EuroWhat. Thanks for listening. The EuroWhat podcast is hosted by Mike McComb, that's me, and Ben Smith.
That's me. If you'd like to help support the show and access a ton of bonus content, head over to patreon.com/EuroWhat.
Free access to our full archive of more than 200 episodes going all the way back to the 2018 contest can be found on our website, EuroWhat.com.
Next time on the EuroWhat, it's Halloween! We're getting all dressed up to chat with Dude Point about the intersection of performance art and Eurovision.